Again guys, welcome back to another House of Devlin video. This particular video is about Ask and Embla, the first man and woman that were created by Odin and lived within the realm of Midgard. Now, Ask and Embla were created shortly after Odin Villienve killed Ymir, and as they were sort of mutilating his corpse, for want of a better word, flaying it and turning it into the realm of Midgard, they raised the land masses out of the seas being his blood, the land masses being his bones and that, and washing upon to the land masses Odin noticed two tree trunks, which were the hairs of Odin. And he noticed these tree trunks, and for some reason it does never explained why or what motivation is behind Odin's actions when he created man and woman. But he decided to take those tree trunks and carve them into the shape of man and woman. Now, the tree trunks were two different types of trees. The first tree that he carved into the shape of a man was an ash tree. And the second tree that he carved into the shape of a woman was an elm tree. And he named these, the first man and the first woman, Ask and Embla, which are just the old words for, well, Ask is the old word for ash. Embla actually means something else. It means water pot, but I'll get into that later. But you can kind of see Embla, elm. You can kind of see the word elm in now. I'm twisting meanings of words now to make a point. But ultimately, you got Ask and Embla created. Okay. Now, other than that, really, the only other really thing to mention is during the creation process of Ask and Embla, within the Eddas, it is described as these inanimate tree trunks shaped like men and women, well, man and woman, were brought to life by the following processes, the old words being Ond, Odir, and La. Now, we know what Ond and Odir mean. Okay, but we don't know what La means. But essentially, Odin, if you look at the translation and translate it into English, Odin gave the breath or the spirit of ecstasy or inspiration into the trees, and La, we believe, means health. So he gave us health also, or life, or physical presence perhaps. But ultimately it was Odin who, and you'll hear this term a lot, breathed life into man and woman, and that comes directly from the Eddas, essentially, as I say, within reference to that particular part of the Edda where he breathed ecstasy into us ultimately, and that is how life is often sometimes described or seen as within Viking or Nordic paganism. Life is an ecstasy almost. Certainly the experience of life can be. Okay, now that's where the story ends. Unfortunately, there's no other story to tell you about Ask and Embla like there is, for example, in the Bible with Adam and Eve, with the Garden of Eden, and there's the betrayal with the snake and the apple and all the rest of it. It just goes from there. From Ask and Embla come men and women, and repopulate Midgard and protect that particular realm until we all die and go to the afterlives. Whoops. Excuse me. Technical difficulties, but one of the things about this, even though the story stops there, is actually there are significant meaning behind the types of trees that we were created from, for example, that we were created from trees to start off with, and some of the references within the Edda that could have double meanings, and its impact and what that it would have on ancient culture, and it's a reflection of actually what the Vikings were like. What if you ask yourself a question, and I'll answer this question when I go through this now. Basically, what I'm trying to say is, within the Viking religion, within the Nordic paganistic religion, are men and women equal? Are they seen as equal beings? Or is man above woman, as he often is in a lot of religions? I'll answer that question. or you'll answer it yourself as I go through just some of the extra little bits that are directly quoted from the Eddas now. Now, one of the poems from the Poetic Edda, called Voluspa, which means the insight of the seeress, says, and this is a direct quote, "There stands an ash called Yggdrasil, a mighty tree showered in white hail. From there come the dews that fall in the valleys. It stands ever green above Urd's well." Now, that little passage there is actually very confusing, because when you first see it at the beginning of the sentence, which is not there, but in the original, in its original written form before it's translated into English, it begins its passage with the word aska, and you think as a result, that the whole paragraph or that little part of the poem is then in reference to Aska, or Ask, the first man that is created. But what is quite interesting is that Yggdrasil, the cosmic tree, the pillar, the central pillar to the cosmos of everything, is also itself an ash tree, something that maybe not a lot of people know. They just know it as the cosmological tree, but it actually was an ash tree, or seen to be an ash tree. But within those, if you listen to those words, if you rewind and listen back to it, you can hear a very hierogamous sort of references being made. Now, hierogamy is a term used in religion, or in relation to religious texts, so within theology essentially, and it basically means that there is essentially either a divine marriage or a sexual or fertility reference within it. And as described before in a lot of my cosmological videos, if you watch any of them, you'll hear me saying about how fate, which comes from the well of Erd, is like water. Essentially, it goes up the cosmological tree to the branches, and from the branches it can return to the well of Erd. This happens in trees. When trees take water through their roots, it goes into the tree, nourishes the leaves, and then excess water that is taken onto the tree leaves the tree via the leaves as dewdrops, and it returns to the soil, to the well, essentially underneath the earth of that tree, back to the roots, where it can then re-nourish the tree. Now, that process is represented in the cosmological tree. As I said, I've described it before in other videos. But this whole process is actually a hierogamous link also, as well as the tree itself, a standing upright image. There's no doubt that obviously that's an erect penis, right? But what is interesting, I'm going to get into the point on how this relates to Ask and Embla in a minute. By the way, guys, don't worry, I'm not rambling on. I've got a point to make. But that sort of hierogamous link of the dewdrops, which represents semen, essentially coming from the god of the sky, essentially, or the skies, essentially. In this case, the branches of the cosmological tree falling through and entering the earth, in this case the well of Erd, represents simply just the fertility process that semen must leave from the god of the sky and enter the god of the earth to bring fertility, to allow life to continue. This tree only lives and continues to live, this cosmological tree only, and everything linked to the cosmological tree, which is all 9 realms, only exists when the flow of fate is continuous and is allowed to be continuous. However, we see, as I say, this also, as I say, directly representing fertility, when the dewdrops that come off the leaves is semen entering the earth, the well of Erd in this case, which is where the waters that feed the cosmological tree exist, and that's where the water returns. And of course, the well of Erd is the womb of the female. Now, what's important is this hierogamous link, especially when you then start looking at the actual real translations of the names of Ask and Embla. Ask meaning ash tree, i.e. essentially Yggdrasil. Yggdrasil is an ash tree, just as the first man was an ash tree. But Embla, the female, is actually, yes, carved from an elm tree, but her name literally translates to water pot, or well, if you wish, just like the well of Erd that feeds the cosmological tree. And so you can see through this hieroglyphs link a direct representation that, or recognition, that within ancient Nordic and Viking culture, you had equality between men and women. You only have to read the first few chapters of Genesis to see how much more favourable this kind of recognition that you need the semen, you need the man, and you need the woman to have life. If you have neither one or the other, the whole thing falls apart. And this was represented in Nordic culture, ancient Nordic culture. Men and women were equal. Women were able to divorce. Women were able to own lands. Women were allowed to fight, so on and so forth. And so this is why there was a much more. I'm not saying they had the same equality that they do these days. I'm not sure. I didn't live 1,000 years ago, but certainly compared to other ancient cultures, this is why Vikings and Nordic people had a much more modern-like society than a lot of the other ancient cultures that existed back then, and it directly links from their religion. They had a heterogeneous religion where fertility was seen as was represented continuously throughout their different stories, and these heterogeneous links are just representative, as they are within any ancient religion or paganistic religion. They are directly representative of equality between the sexes. Okay, so I've made 12 minutes to make a point that there's equality between the sexes, ultimately, and just to tell you the 1 minute story of Ask an Embla. But I hope you enjoyed that, guys. I hope you found it educational, and I'll see you soon.